I don't know if anybody here heard, but last couple of days there's been a bit of a mini controversy about what we'll call elegantly chassan classes. For the last couple of days, looks like people closed the Gemaras, they closed the Shulchan Aruchs, and all they could talk about was this topic. So I think we've been talking about it so much that it counts as giving a shiur on an inyan that's being learned in Kolel. So might as well talk about it. Now, major disclaimer at the top, this is not in any way to be construed as an attack on anyone, not on either side, quote unquote. This is in fact a very complicated, nuanced subject, so it's likely that both sides, to the extent that we're talking about sides, have a point. I also take some issue with the idea that someone should even get up here and kiviyachol tell people what to do, because there's nothing more personal, and therefore to whatever extent, nothing more individualistic than this topic. And I certainly don't get any kicks from mixing into people's lives, and we're not going to ask for a weekly report or anything like that. But there's a hisayrus that Kolelim should get involved, should have a say. So I'd like to contribute the proverbial 2 cents to the discussion, and I hope that it brings some clarity to those who may be slightly confused, etc. Also, just another short disclaimer that I'm going to try to keep the language as clean and elegant as possible, although while trying to ensure that we're clear about what we're talking about, which is definitely an important thing, especially in a chashuva place like this. And just like we were able to learn other halachas here and do it in a tasteful way, so same goes for this. And I've seen the yungeleit talking about it, and I noticed that all the yungeleit taka speak gar edel, so it's not an issue. Very classy bunch of guys. So if we had to define the issues that came up here, right, and ostensibly it's because of a specific incident, but others argue that this is really something which time has come. Its time has come. It's been building up behind the scenes, and it's been something that's demanding our attention. So we could divide this on the subject of intimacy into 3 categories. One is what we'll call euphemistically siman reish mem. I just want to make sure you know what siman reish mem is. I was speaking to someone yesterday. I said, I'm thinking about giving a shiur about siman reish mem. And they said, you mean hilchos kibbud av v'em? I said, no, actually, no, that's here today, very good, but no, I actually meant an Eid HaChaim. He said, Eid HaChaim, that's around Hilchos Shabbos, right? No, what's that about? So, okay, fine. Maybe we should be mekanis, someone who doesn't have to, think about it, someone with life, obviously someone who's very familiar with the subject, but, once you grow up a bit, move on, you don't have to, it's not a hot topic anymore, one assumes. But just to clarify, we're talking about Hilchos Tznius and Eid HaChaim. So that's one. Things you're allowed to do, things you're not allowed to do, that's one topic. Second topic is, we can call prishus. B'chlal, what should the frequency be for a couple? And number 3, what should be the mindset? B'shas ma'aseh, which is the common euphemism. And what does Shiur Kaddish Atzmai mean? And what is the true pshat? What does that actually really mean? And really all of these things are actually mentioned in siman reish mem, but by siman reish mem I mean, can you do this, can you do that? I think there's a bit of an issue with this topic, and things like it, in which those often giving a presentation like to smooth things over, the contradictions, the questions, and they want it to sound nice and clear and straightforward. And I assume that most people who teach it that way. So you come out not necessarily realizing that, first of all, this might be contradicting what the guy across the street is saying. Never mind that the Makairis are taka far from being simple and straightforward. So what I would like to do here, in part, is just to present the backstory, what the issues at hand actually are, and then we can see how it's taken out so pashut. And even specifically within Chabad, it seems pretty clear that there are tremendous shifts and changes taking place with time, and you can't compare it to 150 years ago, 100 years ago, 70, 40, even the last 20, 10, and 5 years. Things seem to, it's accelerating, if anything, the changes and the new ideas that we're hearing. So someone who got married 10 years ago might not even recognize where things have gone. So that perspective is, I think, important and helpful. Once we can distinguish between the different makairis and shittas, and we understand where each idea comes from, then you could actually understand the question. What's the what should you actually do? How should you act in your personal lives? And then one assumes you can draw your own conclusions. You don't need someone to intervene and meddle and tell you exactly what to do, what not to do. Hopefully it will be clear for you to decide. And maybe it is time, maybe the time has come that there should be a discussion, a dialogue on this topic among Rabbanim, Mashpiyim, Madrichim, because sometimes what ends up happening is each one ends up in their own little bubble, so maybe this can contribute something to that discussion. So I just divided it into 3 subjects, but I also want to point out that when we talk about these 3 subjects, there's 3 not necessarily corresponding, but 3 ideas, beruchnias, concepts, that are what we're weighing when we're trying to decide what's the right thing to do. So number 1, what is pashut, basic, what does Torah say a mensch who doesn't want to be a behemoth, etc., should do? That's one aspect. What is halacha? What is Torah? Pashut's basics. Number 2, the question of what impact, what effect it has on one's children. And number 3, there's b'chal, a person's own avodas Hashem, right? According we're chassidim, we're following chassidus. There's supposed to be a person's supposed to be trying to elevate oneself, refine oneself. That's what chassidus Chabad is supposed to be about. Supposed to have some ideas and insights onto how to become a better Ovid Hashem. So all 3 of these spiritual ideas are at play here when we talk about these 3 questions. Let's start with Siman Mem. If you take a look in Siman Mem, especially if you compare it to the makairis that come before it, so one could certainly say that Siman Mem is very extreme in the grand scheme of things. Also to do this, also to do that. Long list of Yisurim. If you look in the Rambam L'mashal, the Rambam fairly famously skips all the details and says, Ishtay shel Adam uteres iloi, he bought all the rights. Lefichach kol ma she'adam reitzeh lasas be'ishtay oiseh, b'chol eis she'yirtzeh, whatever he wants to do. That's all that Rambam has to say about that. And then he adds, there's also midas chassidus sheyikadosh atzmai. So someone who's looking to do whatever they want can easily find justification for practically anything. You can say, I'm paskening like the Gemara, I'm paskening like the Rambam, I identify as a Rambamist now. Or you'll even find other days in the Achreinim, Shulchan Aruch isn't the end all, I found other Achreinim that say other things. Or you can put Pshat Lach into the Shulchan Aruch, reinterpret the Shulchan Aruch. So, Lamashal, I want to talk about one thing here in the Shulchan Aruch, right? So there's something the Shulchan Aruch calls Derech Azus. I'm going to refer to it by that. I hope and assume everyone knows what we're referring to. I'll say it once. Hi l'mayla v'hu l'mata, harei zu Derech Azus. Right? So the vart was, it doesn't say Asr, there's no Lashon Isser here. It just says Derech Azus, so it's not Isser, Asr, Mutter. Or maybe even, there's a reason, it says it is a derech azus. So maybe it depends on what your attitude, what your mindset is. If it's coming from azus, yeah. If you come from a different angle, then maybe it's not. How we come this to teach something like that into Shulchan Aruch? Maybe there's talk a good marker and I don't know about it, in which case I'll retract. The only thing I came across is some random sefer called Beis Halavanin on Tur Beis Yosef Chaim, came out 3 years ago. And I saw Hitaka says mamish the exact same thing. Like tafas kan lashon iser, mashma daleki yisura. It's just not right to do. It could also have an effect on the child. Oh, but maybe it doesn't have an effect on the child, only if it's taka done, kederech azus, but if they agree to, and they're both on board, so then it's not coming as azus, it's not a chutzpah. So but there's a Gemara that says that it also is a sakana. How is that going to shtim? But it doesn't seem like the Sefer has a bakar either, or he would have said so, but at most we see that there's this idea that's starting to spread, it's gaining adherence. Pashtus, what difference? It says l'mashal, Aser lo'er haner, in Siman Shmem, Aser bayayim. They all have the same thing in common. According to Chazal, this is a pagam for the child, this is sakana to the there's no difference. These are all the same types of inyanim. So, to whatever extent you're saying that that's Aser, but Pashtus, this is also Aser. Why is it written like that in Shulchan Aruch? Because that's the Lashon in Maseches Kalas, and the Mechaber uses Lashonos from this farm that come before him. I'm not saying you could be mefalpel a lot more and be medayak, but that's not the place. And also the Lashon Azus, where did you get the idea that, where does one get the idea that it's only if it's like a chutzpah neged the man, but Pashtus, be'etzem, the act itself is an act of Azus. Doesn't say depends when, if, who decided. So that's Pasha Pshat in Shulchan Aruch. There's someone, a contemporary fellow today, who wrote a few volumes of a shut called Birchas Yehuda, and he has a few shuvas, likutim on these topics. I've used them a little bit in preparing this. He points out there's the Chidah has a pirush kisei rachmim on Masechtas Tanis, which includes Maseches Kala, which is the makar of this phrase. So the Chidah says on this din, Shamaiti me'achad migdalei hadar, passed away, that this Shiloh was asked in the yeshiva in the big city of Shel Chachamim, Konstantina. Halacha l'maisa. Someone was pashat so sick, maybe they were paralyzed. It was not shaykh b'chlal. He's lying prone. What can we do? So he says, they went to look, they went to work, they were researching, till they found a sheet of Rishonim on a Darim where the Gemara talks about this, and they found a Rishon that says it's mutter, the shari. And then he brings another marker that says maybe this halacha only applies in certain circumstances, not others. So he's medayik, so if that marker, if it's not whatever, then shari. So the language here is it mutter or is it not mutter? We found a way that it's mutter. So the implication is if it's not mutter, then it's aser. That's how they read the Maseches Kala, that's how they read the Shulchan Aruch. You look in the Das Torah of the Marsham, much more recent, he quotes the Chidah, and then he says, the Chidah said that, b'she'ena, if it's not, then mutter, and then the Marsham says, mistim al she'or paiskim le'nidakain. That doesn't seem like it's the mainstream view. The mainstream view of paiskim is that it applies across the board. So if it's not mutter, then it's aser. So, the assumption was that there's an isser, like all the other isurim in the siman, and now you can discuss, is there a heter, is not a heter? I already said, if you're looking for a tatum, or you're looking for a basis for justification, there are many, many ways. But if we're just trying to define what is andunum and what is the mainstream, how is halacha understood, so yeah, we know there are people that are, bemoaning the fact that Shulchan Aruch decided to go so extreme. Shulchan Aruch could have easily gone in the other direction. What a brach. But the Pashtus, the Shulchan Aruch is considered the main makar, the central makar on these inyanim. And it's broadly angenommen that someone who wants to do the right thing follows what's prescribed in Shulchan Aruch. And whatever is mentioned in the siman is mechayev equally. Could be, it's taka true, there are situations in which, with all the good intentions, you want to taka do what it says in Shulchan Aruch, you're not looking to get out of it, but there's taka some real issue, something that seems to prevent things from being done properly. Then, that's taka when you can start being matir legitimately, according to different mekaydes, like the chidah, this, that. And then maybe you could mix this idea in that, maybe taka, Torah says that maybe now it's taka not derech azus, because you taka mamish, doing it nachmet, that's a brach in haaretz, I didn't want to do this, maybe then you can say this vart. just at least to feel better about it. Of course, we also need to define what does it actually mean that you need to. Is we're talking about something extreme, a real severe illness, that would be a very small percentage of cases. Or are we expanding the definition to anybody who says, a slight discomfort, this, that. But ultimately, it's a very individual thing. If yechidim have an issue, so then they should go to either a madrich or to a rav or to both. But not something seemingly that's for public consumption. And just I'll point out on this topic, on related topics, there's a sefer Shiur Kaddish Atzmai by Lubavitcher and Eretz Yisrael, Rabbi Nachmanson, which can also be, anyone who's interested in exploring these types of makayos, it's definitely a good place to start. But moreover, it seems that I was looking to see anything in Chabad directly on this question. It seems that there's mamish of a mefurishe maimer of the Reb Marash, and the shtickle hafladik maimer Reb Marash. I haven't seen that anybody has noticed it before, pointed it out before. In Tafresh Lamed Beis, there's a maimer dibra maschol hamazbeach eitz shalish amis goiva pasuk in Yechezkel, and it appears there in Tafresh Lamed Beis chelik alaf 3 times. There's a kitzer of the maimer in Ksaviyat Kodesh, there's the maimer itself in Ksaviyat Kodesh, and then there's a hanacha. I'll use the hanacha here as the basis because it's the clearest. So there with the Mizbeach, it mentions the Mizbeach in Yechezkel, then it mentions the Shulchan, and that's actually where the pasuk, the famous pasuk, V'yidaber Elai zeh Shulchan asher lefnei Hashem, in its original context is talking about the Shulchan. And Chazal already, Menachos say that Bizman shebeis hamikdash kayim Mizbeach mechaper. Now Shulchan shel Adam mechaper olav. What's this idea? The Shulchan is mechaper. So that Marash, obviously you're not going through the whole Maimer, but that Marash explains that Bechlal, you have the Sidei and Chassidus, that the sherish of the food is higher than the person eating it, so that's how the person eating it can derive something from the food. And the same goes for a tzaddik. The tzaddik also can get hashpas in this way. So that's Shulchanei Mechaper Alav. That's how he teaches it. And the Marash says, the Zelu Mazeh also Lekim, we have Shulchan B'kedusha and Shulchan B'lu'um Mazeh. Where do you see Shulchan B'lu'um Hazeh? So you have this Gemara that a woman came to Rabbi v'amra Shulchan arachti loi v'havchai. She wanted to do things the normal way with her husband, and the husband wanted to do it abnormally. And Rabbi was matter. Rabbi resolved the situation. She came to complain. Rabbi said, no, it's fine. So Zakta Marash doesn't mean that he was matter legamre. Oh, go ahead. You have my endorsement. Shemutar lasis kain. So from the Lashon derech azus here in the Maimer, now there's a question: what case is that Gemara talking about? What's hafichas hashulchan? There's 2 taichin, either shleik adarka or this. Rashi, well, it's not Rashi, but the Mefarish and Adarim elsewhere, Haifchim HaShulchanim brings both pirushim, this and that. Different Yishanim say different things. But the Lashon the Maimer mentioning Matzina b'Gemara shezu derech azus v'chatzifus, the Chayre seems to be machriya that for the purpose of this Maimer we're talking going with this pshat that we're talking about. And then the Marash adds v'gam shezeh plukta and mutter. It's b'chal machoikas if it's mutter or not. And in the Ksaviyat Kodesh version, the Lashon is shehagam sherebi hitir mikomakim ayim edivrei apaiskim shezeh b'koi v'zeh b'koi. So what was the heter of Rabbi Zakta Marash? That she doesn't need a get. It's not, it doesn't rupture the whole marriage. It's not the end of the world. So what do we see from here? What's the euphemism in the Gemara? Shulchan arachti loi. So we see from here that this inyan is called Shulchan. In the Ksaviyat Kodesh it says, Shenikra hayichud b'shem Shulchan. And we see other psukim that are associated with lechem, etc. So that's Shulchan B'lu'um Hazeh Zakta Marash. But this is klipas noiga. It could go either way. But when you send it into Lu'um Hazeh, then what the outcome is that you have the pasuk ubasar b'soda treifa leisei chelu. The outcome, when one goes down the wrong path, is nashgaz, and that's leisei chelu. That you can't be mevaret. Your mamish in ganzen farfahren. This basar is the ever habris. B'soda treifa. That the soda is based on a zoyar. There's the soda de klippa. So basar b'soda treifa means that It's a gate of nashgas. Now, how do you get from shulchan, sagt der Marash, all the way to basar b'sada treifa, very extreme? So he says that Lamaila ein ra yirid milamaila. So you know where it all starts from, sagt der Marash? It all starts from shulchan arachti. When you have shulchan arachti, so then kommt man on to basar b'sada treifa. And how do you get to that? So it says in Sefer Yetzirah, bris hamar, bris haloshen. So he says, ikar avodas ha'adam hu netiras habris. Very interesting lashonos. Then he says, when a person starts, that he's paigim b'milas haloshen, so then that leads to the next step. And that's besides the bittul Torah it talks about in time. We're talking about medaber dvarim mechayarim, person speaking grub. So that's paigim b'milas haloshen. That brings to pagam habris. V'achakach yuchal lavoi lidei shulchan arachti loi. Then that's the next step, and then the next step is basar b'sada treifa zun ashkaz leisei chaylu, you can't be mevar, you're lost. And again, the Maimer concludes with the Maimer explains that netilas yadayim is here to counteract the issue with the shulchan. So kol ha'eichel b'lei netilas yadayim keilu bal eishes ish, because the netilas yadayim wards off this possibility. But if you don't have the vart of netilas yadayim, so then it's endig zich. Again, he repeats it again, that Deiz l'shulchan arachti, k'ilu bal eishes ish. So, very interesting b'chlal that Marash is talking about something like this in a Maimer. Es gedenkt sich that it says somewhere that Marash was notable for the fact that he would speak amol, like Pashat basic and Yanim, for maybe some of the more Pashat balabatim that were listening to the Maimer, because that's what sounds like is happening here. I found one other place in Chassidus where this Indian is mentioned, the Kitzer, the guy Kairach. There's a Kairach wanted to change the order of things, the dynamics. So, Tzemach Tzedek writes that one of the things was that he didn't want the Malchus should be Mekabel Mizah, Kiyim Adarabba. Bezel, Derech Maimer Azel, Hum Lamata V'yim Lamayla Zel, Derech Azus, Kala, Erechayim. Pistaka, on a certain level, we say that man is higher, and that's only if it's Tafelu Batal. When you're Tafelu Batal, when you're in the right place, then Pistaka Garharch. He says, like about Shuvah. We say, Balit Shuvah, G'daylim, it's Tzadikim G'daylim. Yeah, but M'komakim ein zes el la'achar shu tafel v'shafel v'nivza be'ein of nimas. So, you have to understand the hierarchy. There are other places where the Tzemach Tzedek also mentions Shulchan Arachti Loi, but there it's not so clear which taich he's going with, and it sounds a little bit more like he's going with the other taich in that Lashon. Even in Tavish Lamed Beis, there's room for debate, but we're not going to get into it. But there's certainly no indication to the other direction anywhere in Chassidus or anything that Rabbi said that there's any idea of Nishtan Ha'itim or this or that. No trace of that. So according to all of the above, you have first of all what's considered basic halacha, how a person should conduct themselves according to Shulchan Aruch. You also have Primis Yanyanim, the way Chassidus explains how it's mamish negeh to a person's avodah, and the person could be set on the wrong trajectory if he does the wrong thing. And number three, of course, which maybe is the main thing, is the children, the outcome, the product. Like everyone knows, from Tanya Perek Beis, Shekadesh Atzmai, which we'll get to soon, and the whole way it's structured there in Tanya is it's for the children. So, Kal V'chaymer, Tanya should talk about Shekadesh Atzmai, but Kal V'chaymer, that the etzem act should be done according to the way Torah says, in order to not cause any pagam for the children to be born. And again, if there's some kind of urgent issue, shas hadchak, so then that's where everything that was said and publicized has a place. And then again, maybe you can even say that, in this scenario, we shouldn't even call it derech azus, although as of now, no good mucker, it seems, for that. But it's just very important to understand the correct context for matters for things like that. Now I want to move on to the second topic, which is Prishus, Bechlal, how often, how frequent. And this is very illustrative of the idea that I want to talk about, which is that if we research the topic, we'll see that it seems pretty clear that Amal, once upon a time, things were different, they understood things differently. And then the Rebbe Taka came along and gave a chiddush, a yisoid, and said that nowadays is different, which is an important yisoid to keep in mind when we're talking about topics like this. Now, I wasn't able to find any good Makairis that Taka tell us what Chassidim were doing, or even I didn't even get around to finding this different vertlach that I think we've heard that can give us an inkling as to what the attitudes were. I didn't have a chance to be masader them, but at this moment I have no doubt that up until 100 years ago, 70 years ago approximately, Prishus was also considered an Inyan, and they verbrenged about it, and they had vertlach on it, not to minimize as much as possible. Bechlal, if you had to map the frum world today, so one would say, Bechlal, the Litvisha, the Yeshivisha Welt is very open, you go in one direction. And then you have the Chassidische Welt. The Chassidische Welt is a very hard line, and there's a lot of chumras and kedusha and takunas and all of the terms we all know now. But, interestingly, in the course of going through this, I came across an interesting machlekes a few years ago between the Oz Nidberu of Zilber, who's from Litvisha Chug, versus Menashe Klein, Mishnah Halachas, who broadly is identified with the Chassidische Olam. Taka Pasha machlekes, praktish, Bizman Hazeh, is there an Inyan for Prishus or not? Of course, the Haskama and the Mechila and the Rishos. And the Oz Nidberu was saying, no, not really, it's not really a thing. And the Mishnah Halachas was saying, what are you talking about? You have different Mekayres and different Tzadikim, and of course it's a thing. So, interesting to see it being debated that way in Shalos HaTshuvos. But when you picture that map, that dichotomy, so I think it's it would be accurate to say that a mall 100 years ago, Chabad, if you had to place Chabad would be much closer in the Chassidische side of the map with regards to these types of things. And over the last few decades, we've migrated to the other side of the map. And it makes a lot of sense to say so, because you look in the Alter Rebbe in Tanya, Chassidus Chabad Bechlal, as a whole Torah about Taivas Heter, Iskafia. Now, usually the focus is the examples given have to do with eating. And of course, even in eating, that was considered a real Inyan in Avodah till not that long ago. Today, I don't know, but till pretty recently. But it's pretty clear, following that logic, that this is also in the same category, in the same gather. And in fact, in Tanya, the two are mentioned together, as we'll see. So Ebazai, Pashtos, they treated both things the same way. And included in that is what you find in Chassidus. Chassidus talks about, when it comes to Pashas Matis, Nedarim, Siag La Prishos. Chassidus is very into the phrase Nedarim, Siag La Prishos, and that this is how one should conduct oneself, halacha l'maisa. And it's brought even to the Rebbe's Sichos. You have Sichos of the Rebbe where the Rebbe says that, on one hand you have Nedarim Siag La Prishos, on the other hand you have Dayach HaMasha Asar Torah. And the answer is that Nedarim Siag La Prishos is for a regular person who doesn't know how to handle Gashmis properly. And the Dayach HaMasha Asar Torah is for the Rebbe mentioned. The Rebbe is still saying that. It could be in the Rebbe's Torah it's a little more complex. There might be other indications in other directions. But there's definitely this idea in Chassidus down to the Rebbe. And in fact, I did manage to find a few examples in Chassidus where it does seem to allude to this topic as well. There's a Maimon of the Alter Rebbe from Parsha Shlach, Tov Kuf Samach Zayin. The Alter Rebbe says that surely the Chumrius Haguf, the physicality, is Mailim on the Ha'ara, Likis. It's a contradiction, of course, to godliness. V'hainu b'mashen nimshach ha'adam achar taiva gufnis ka'achila v'tashmish v'chayetze. Right? Both things. And then you don't see the nitzitz haliki, even though it was all heter. And that's why you have iskadishtem, yisengdeshim, kadosh atzchol mutalach, od mekadosh atzim ma'at, mekadosh nesim l'mayla harbe. And the idea is that the kedusha is so powerful that it's stronger than the kli amayla master. And the Alter Rebbe says, so the word is, "V'hu inyan is dakchos ha'chaymer, gam b'tayva gufnis ha'muterlach, kamoi b'zivug v'achila v'kayetze, ad shelo yizgashim klal mechamasam." So the idea by both is that just like when one's eating, it should not be megashim, so the idea is for zivug as well. That's the attitude we have. Weiter in Tovkov Samach Zayin, there's a maimer from Matis about Nedarim. Describes that a person eats a Meichel HaMutter, how it's very megashim a person, it's megashim the beguf, it's megashim the neshama. There's the gasas haruach. That comes from the chelek hara in the food. So, and then he says, v'chein b'inyan hazivug. Im echavim b'kedusha, toisef le'er. V'im lav, yipol mitayves heter le'isr chas v'shalom. So this is very much part and parcel of how the Alter Rebbe is talking about these things. Not Tfias Kadishtam, Yisim Kadishim. And in Eira Teir Shlach, Tzemach Tzedek, where he also brings this Inyan from Shlach, maybe it's possibly the clearest. Weiter, the Nitzitzaliki, Meskashim Kebehema, Kaddish Atzacham Mutalach. And then he says, kedusha is Lashon Havdalah, but it's saying in Leimar, Sheyafrish Atzmai Mitayves Heter, Kamei Bezivuk V'achila, Zelasi Hanitzrach L'Shem Shemayim, V'ozla Yiskashim Klal, Mechamasam. So this is the idea, to be mafresh oneself from both. So it seems pretty clear that besides the Kaddish Atzmai, the mindset, there's also Yafrish Atzmai. That's what the Tzemach Tzedek says. And we also can see this, Pashut, from all the letters of the Rebbe. The number of times the Rebbe had to write to people not to do that. Why are there so many letters? Clearly, lots of people were coming with this idea, at least, the Yuds, those people already have been born, 30, 40, 50 years or before. So you look in Shulchan Menachem and Even Ezer, by Oina, you'll see a bunch of mechtavim. There's one from Tavshin Tezvav. Presumably that he's not having children. Look in Torah Megillas Esther. There's a famous line in Torah Megillas Esther that's not a dover mos. It's vila afterwards. No, it's a dover gadol. Of course, Chassidus is full of this idea that it's a dover gadol. And the Rebbe says, I want an update about how Shalom Bayis is doing. There's another letter from Tavshin Tezayin where it's not fully clear, but it seems like the question was, on the one hand, it says, Einis Tamid Chachamim Alel Shabbos, Alel Shabbos. The shaila is, what about the weekdays? Is it B'chlal Shaykh during the weekday, or is it not? Because in Reishis Chachma, he seems to be Machmer. And is there a difference between Shana Rishayna and afterwards? So the Rebbe says, a chilik between Shana Rishayna and afterwards, you never found. So it seems pretty clear that it's not a real, there's no such thing. So in Nigla, you can look in Siman Shmem, and Eben Ezra Siman Ayin Vav, and the Rebbe says, look in Pischei Tshuva and Siman Ayin Vav, where he quotes from the Kadam Shleima. The Kadam Shleima there in Siman Ayin Vav concludes that B'atzem, a Talmid Chacham should, even though we don't have a din Talmid Chacham today, but certainly in this Inyan, it's past that a Ben Torah should say, I'm doing Einis Talmid Chachamim. But then the Kadam Shleima concludes and says, Ach mishum pritzas hader, v'kinas yerech chaverta ani mur galoymar l'chol asviv melai l'kayim einas poelim shtayim b'Shabbos. That's what the Rebbe is being metzayin to. Legabi this question of weekday versus not. If it's shtayim b'Shabbos, then that means it's one of them is on a weekday. Then the Rebbe gets into the Gufa, the Reishis Chachma, the Zoyar. The Rebbe says, B'negei l'poel, all we know is what it says in Kisvei Arizal. In Kisvei Arizal itself, there's chiluk l'shaynis. Pri Etz Chaim seems to say it's Osir b'choil. Mishnas Chasidim Tamei Mitzvah seems to say that it could be okay b'choil. The Rebbe says, Deish la'achriya, like the Tamei Mitzvah and the Mishnas Chasidim. And the Rebbe concludes and says that everything we're saying, Nigla, Kisvei Arizal, whatever we're saying, to whatever extent one's limiting oneself, it's only Sh'layova Yedei Prishus Yedei Yonim Chamunim Yoiser Meha Omer. But if there's even Makam Nachshash Zeh, Barar Sheyifrish Meha Prishus. And the Rebbe says Shuv Matzasi in the Mishnah Berurah, where the Mishnah Berurah also brings these in Yonim. Another letter from Tavshin Yud Zayin. It's censored in the Igris. Maybe someone has the missing part, but the Rebbe is writing to someone about another Rav, and this is that Rav. Asar b'meshach kol hashavua v'hitir rak b'leil Shabbos kodesh. He made an instant for his community, for his kehillah. It's only Leil Shabbos. And it sounds like it was b'pirsim or b'toikef. The Rebbe says, "Muvenes hatetzoes sheyesh lachshish lahanau b'dereinu der yasam." You can't play around like that in this generation. And if you can't change his mind, maybe the Rebbe says, maybe I'll intervene myself and write to him. Another letter from Tavshin Tazayin, person wrote to the Rebbe, should I push it off by a month? It says, Pshita, not to. For that you need full agreement from the Tzad Hasheni, and Hayes Paiskim say there's Tzad Degufa for the other person, so it's not even clear whether they ever can fully, wholeheartedly agree. And the Rebbe says, I already wrote to a number of people, Shechomer B'zeh, Kulahi, Void Gerua Mikula, Derenu Daryasim, this Lashon, Mu'atim Hem Elu Hashayachim Leprishus, without being Nichshel, Rachman al-Etzlan, Yiratzin, that you stay away from this whole inyan, because getting too much into it is not Ritsuya, and Pshita, that it's not Nidreshes. And one more, I mean there are many more, but one more from Dashan Tezvav, the Kasaka Daitach, about Prishus, if she'll agree, Ein Daiti Neichamizeh, because first of all, Ruba de Ruba, Mechil is not Belev Shalom, but Tzarech Ian Gadol, if Prishus like this, Meisifa Tara, Umetaheres is HaMachshava, Oila Hapachas V'Shalom. So Rabbi says the Daiti, that's not the way to get to where you want to go. And again, look in Torah Megillah Esther. So from all these letters, it seems fairly clear. Now, on the one hand, the Rebbe is not being mechadash anything completely radical. There are other Svardim and Mekaydes and Nigla and even in Kabbalah talk about this. But on the other hand, you see clearly from the Rebbe there was a Mal Azah Inyan, and the Rebbe is emphasizing, but Dereinu, Deryasim, I don't know anybody who this is actually negayah to. Is it actually helping anyone? Which, like I said before, could be, we should consider this possibly as a very chashav yesod, and all of these inyanim that you do have to always consider the outcome. You can't just say, shteit in svarim, you have to see what the outcome is. But still, of course, within the miskaros of Shulchan Aruch, but maybe not to overdo anything. That's instructive. And now we'll get to the final topic, which maybe is the most important one, which is, what is Shei Kadosh Atzmai? What does it mean, kedusha, b'shas ma'isa? Right, so this, of course, is mentioned in Tanya Perek Beis, right? Mashakasa b'zer chadash, she'ikar tali Shei Kadosh Atzmai b'shas tashmish dafka. That's because you need the levush for the nefesh. V'im yekadosh es atzmai yamshech levush kadosh l'nishmas b'nai, v'afilu yinashama gedoyla tzricha l'kiddush aviv. So the context here, like we mentioned earlier, is for the children, for those who will be born as a result. But it's also mentioned again in Perek Zayin. It's missing on the daf, but the Rebbe adds it, reinserts it in the Luach HaTikun. Perek Zayin, it says, those who are Zeilei Basar, Sevei Yayin, the Malis, Tavis, Guf, V'nafshei Bahamis, so Mamish goes Lefisha, but Agomor, etc., etc. But the Rishimu, even after you retrieve it, Rishimu Nishar B'guf, and that's why you need Chibut HaKever. V'chein achayas shepetipa zera sheyatzu mimenu b'tava Bahamis, sheloi kiddush atzmi b'shas tashmish imishtei ta'ira. So here, like we mentioned earlier, the Alter Rebbe is putting the two together, and he's saying that the same way a person eats food with a taiva, so spleip to Rishimu, he needs a tikkun. So the same goes for this. So that's in the context of one's own personal avodah, neshama, etc. However, technically, Alter Rebbe never defined what Shei Kadosh Atzmai actually means. Now, so seemingly one of the biggest chedushim, new ideas in the last couple of years, is that Shei Kadosh Atzmai means that you should be 100% focused and in the moment, and but focusing on your partner, it's not on yourself. The question is, where does this taich come from? And does it have a Yisayid Chassidus or not? So first of all, I saw that this Birchas Yehuda that I mentioned earlier, who has a shtickle on this as well, he points out that if you look in Kisvei Arizal, so Reb Chaim Vital in the Hakdama to Sefer Eitz Chaim, as Horis Sur Meira, Reb Chaim Vital writes, Gam Yekadosh es Atzmei betashmesh hamita shaloi yene. Should not have a no. That is seemingly the definition of being Mekadosh Atzmei. And also, Mari Tzemach, also edited the Kisvei Arizal, in his Sefer he writes, Shelo Yena, and another Sefer he writes, V'lo Yena ela kamisha k'voi shed, which is a phrase that Comes up a lot in this context. In fact, if you open the Shulchan Aruch, it's actually pretty clear right there in the Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch and Simon Shmem says it should be be'em uvayira, like I said about Rabbi Eliezer, kamisha k'foy shade. What does k'foy shade mean? Be'em uvayira ki'ilu k'foy shade. V'yesh mefarshim that other things which are kedei l'mayit hana asoi v'doime kamisha k'foy shade she'oisa hadavar bo'eines. Your mamish, you feel compelled. It's very uncomfortable for you. And the Shulchan Aruch concludes, "V'chulu pedusha isnu." All these pedushim are all true. V'tzarach bal nefesh lizar b'hem. So the Mechaber is going real stark here on this Inyan as well. And this memra of kamisha k'fay shay, that's the top Maimer Chazal that those that want to argue otherwise have to contend with and explain. But it seems that if you go with Shulchan Aruch, those who go in the derech of the Arizal, the shita is like that, kipshita. I looked a little bit in Chassidus Chabad to see if there's any reference one way or the other. Again, I haven't seen that anybody else has tried to do this. So Mamari Ad Ben Azakin in Yanim, meaning it's not tagged to a particular year. I found it says V'loch in tzarech lekadish es atzmei b'shas tashmish ki kol zman shehu mekushe b'yoser ba'atzmus hanefesh shor shoy l'mayla. If you're attached above, that's good. Not for one's own pleasure. Like it says, Rabbi said, then mamshich me'atzmusa neshama kedusha. When we talk about being mamshich and neshama, yishei kadosh atzmai, that's what we mean. Loila na'asa kilu k'fay shed. Ma'im without the Rebbe.
Is this called the same din as on the kick of someone as a latola? It's only for tzaddikim. This din is not for people. I'm just going to
Who said that?
I don't understand it.
Okay, fine. So we're getting to what the state of affairs are in this generation. But let's start with what the Alter Rebbe was saying, what the Alter Rebbe meant. If you read what the Alter Rebbe said and meant, it sounds like that was the message, that was the official message, and that is what the hadracha was, and that's what everyone was aspiring to do, and not lavdavka. Everyone felt that they mamish were matzliach, just like with achila. Does everyone feel they were matzliach and achila? But that's what the sheif is. That's what the objective is. Whether how close you get to the objective, we'll see. I'll quote from a chassid soon who says that misha k'fay shay is not shaykh as well. We'll get to that. But we're talking about this concept comes from Tanya. We're trying to define what Tanya meant. I think it's instructive to know what the Alter Rebbe meant when he said that. Biyuri Hazayar is Biyuri Hazayar, which is the Alter Rebbe written by the Mittel Rebbe. It describes there that the stam shetzarich lekadish is atzmai, because in order to be mitzi, the nefesh will kiss from the sitra achra. The neshama is captive by the sitra achra. So you're like on a mission. You're here to sneak and extract the neshama from the koyach of the sitra achra. So tzarich lo haitzi betara v'kedusha kadei shelo yishar b'yitzia zu shum shemetz v'yanikol achitzeinim achra yitziyasa misham. Because if it's not, if Shem loy teitze betara, yishar adayin lehem imena is a shaychus v'kasher v'achiza gam b'yesa b'gufa. Just an interesting way how the Alter Rebbe described how you're trying to mamish, snatch the neshama, and that's why you need the ultimate kedusha betara, because even the slightest diversion from that means it's going to be pagam the child. B'chala, of course, she'ekadosh atzma is mentioned a bunch of other places in Chassidus as well, not necessarily always defining what it means. However, now to get to the part where we acknowledge that this is very complex, this is of course way more complex than eating a mashal. Right? Technically eating, it seems plausible, maybe no one wants to do it, it seems plausible that you could eat really, black bread, and it's possible, like it says in Pirkei Avos, mayim k'pasim melech teichel, mayim mesura tishta. Here, by definition, it's impossible to avoid the fact that it's a pleasurable act. Chassidus itself it mentions this many times. Bechlal, sometimes when Chassidus uses this as a mashal, Chassidus will emphasize that the whole inyan of Hazra comes through Tainug. Someone pointed out to me yesterday, you have a Maimer Mittel Rebbe in Kontreisim, L'havin Yinechav the Mashiach, where it's like a mamish, a tremendous graphic arichos about that aspect. The Azra and the Tainuk. I found the mashal, there's a Maimer of the Mittel Rebbe in Balak. Mittel Rebbe says, his context is Shabbos. So he says, on Shabbos we know that Eine Gufni, the bus of a dogim, Eine Megashim Kol Kach. on Shabbos. You're having an oinig gufni abasar v'dagim, it's not megashim. Doesn't have the pseilus of ra so much. And then it adds, Valkein bezivuk b'Shabbos, yachal lekalish es atzma yoser, so that it goes easier for the person to be mekalish himself on Shabbos as well. Like it says in Zohar, zivug dechakimin b'Shabbos dafka, this word that we were discussing earlier in the letter of the Rebbe, these mekayres from the Zohar and on about how dafka Shabbos. We're still teaching that it should be done the best possible way. The middle Rebbe is saying, yeah, no, we're acknowledging the reality. The reality is, especially b'choil, that with all the kaddish atzchim mutalach, you're not going to get a way around the reality. The reality is that that's what kind of act this is. That's one reason why this is more complicated. Number two, a person has an obligation towards one's wife, aina, and it should be in a happy, pleasurable way. So there's another person in the picture. You can't just, which is one of the things that are mentioned in the letters. It's not just you. The other person's haskama, and is there haskama really a good haskama or not? You can't just decide what you want to do. And number three, even al piruchnis hanyanim l'chayra, from a lot of mekayres, it seems like it's axiomatic, it's understood that a zivug, by definition, is something that's besimchu v'ava, and all the mishalm and mishalm chassidus. We talk about zivug and l'mayla. The implication is that there's a tremendous simcha and ava. So it's a little hard to completely wipe and wash that away. It's a part of the mitzias and that Hashem created as well. So how does that fit in exactly? The talk, if you look in that Sefer Berchas Yehuda, interestingly goes through a lot of mekayres, and if you switch from the mindset of trying to faran for everything, if you just classify shittas and say this says this says that, what you essentially come away with and realize is that this has been machlekas, a disagreement, a dialogue, for the last 1,500 years. Basically from the Gemara, because you have Kfoy Shade in the Gemara, you have 10 other Mamar Chazal in the Gemara that seem to say otherwise. And different Yishayim are machriya different ways, different achrayim. And you see Lashaynus. In some places you see these Lashaynus of, you want to be Mamayt Hana, you want to think about something else. And you have others from that say, be normal, Ava, Bechiba, be present. It's been going on for hundreds and hundreds of years. It would be interesting to go through all of those, but now is not the time. However, l'chayra, all of these points still run up against what it seemingly says in Chassidus Chabad, and even what was taught, and at least people strive to practice in Chabad till fairly recently. So, right, Lamashal, at the very least, they would say, Taka, the entire time, one's mind should try to be occupied with Hacharizachen. That was, I would think, a fairly uncontroversial idea up until very recently. The taka person should be trying to keep that in mind the whole time. And I found taka chassid from previous generation who lived not too long ago, learned in Tim Chitzmimim, was a Rabbi in Yisrael. His name was Alexander Sender Yudasin. Passed away Tavshim Mem Gimel not that long ago. So he has a sefer Halekach v'Halibu Vantanya. He printed it in Tavshin Chavches. So if you look there in Perek Beis, this Inyan, so this is what he writes. The Inyan HaKiddush, why are we Mekadosh Atzmai? Ki b'shas tashmish tzorech lo'erer es koyach hatainug. You're not getting around that. That's happening. She'al kein tzorech mo'ed lihizar. So that's why we need extra care. Then he says, Va'af ki rechayke manu me'er b'liezer dekilu kfai. So okay, you see Hashkafa, Chassidus Sharav. We're already at this point, b'liezer kfai, that's not where the realm we're inhabiting. You can't lose focus. At the very least, think, okay, it's also something. Then, by which I think he means people that are a little bit more edel. That's the kavanah. The whole part is that we're trying to bring children into the world. So that should be the kavanah. Straightforward and reasonable enough, seemingly. But then interestingly, at the end, he emphasizes, Gam adgashas hazoyar she'ikar tolish yekadosh atzmoi b'sh'as tashmish dafke. V'loy maspik atar of akidosh t'lefnei atashmish. Kitzarech lekadosh atzmoi be'ez shemis'er atainuk. So he dafke bavarin that avada means b'shas mamash. So you see he's acknowledging the Metzias. And like I said, even when it comes to eating, who's already makbid on that? On the other hand, it's a little, in a certain way, it's more chamer than eating, because here it's neged to children. But we're not completely uprooting and erasing and deleting the whole thing. But as we said, in the last couple of years, it seems like there's another idea that's making its way around. So in my opinion, we can point at and identify and pinpoint where this idea came from. And interestingly, it would seem that this idea came from a very chashva product of the Musar yeshivas in Litta. One of the biggest ones, the most influential one still today, was the yeshiva of Slobodka. The altar of Slobodka, all the Rosh yeshivas come out in America were his talmidim. So one of his big talmidim was someone by the name of Rabbi Isaac Sher. And from 1925, Slobodka split. Part of Slobodka went to Chevron. That's where you have Yeshivas Chevron from till today. But part of Slobodka stayed in Slobodka, and at that point, Isaac Sher was the leader of the yeshiva in Slobodka. If those familiar with Rav Zevin's Svarim B'Seifrim, so in Svarim B'Seifrim, he has a review of a kavitz that the yeshiva in Slobodka put out at the time in the 20s. So there's Nigla in there, but there's also Divrei Musar from Rabbi Isaac Sher. So Rav Zevin astutely points out that it's very interesting to note that you have two Talmidim that come from the same cheder, and yet they diverge so dramatically. He says one Talmud, famous Talmud of Slobodka, was Rabbi Chasman, and Rabbi Chasman, who's, you see in his writings, is mevatel gashmias. Gashmias is a distraction. You want to stay away from it. And Rabbi Isaac Sher, well, Slobodka was famous for godless Adam, whatever that means, but Rabbi Isaac Sher, Taka seems to be going and saying, Gashmias is amazing, it's gavaldik, you have to embrace the Gashmias. And he quotes from that kovetz where he's talking about Shabbos. Shabbos, you're being misaneg on the Gashmias and the Ruchnis together, and that's the beauty of Shabbos, a whole beer like that. And Rav Zevin made his comment. So it turns out that this Rav Isaac Sher wrote an entire kuntres called Kedusha Yisrael for Chasanim. And Amol, you had to get a copy from someone. Today, it's been scanned, it's online, it's accessible. And there we find that he took this idea from Shabbos and he applied it to here as well. And he bases himself on the Ramban. He ties that he's essentially explaining the shit of the Ramban on this topic, the Garas Ramban. He says people are confused. People that it's tzaddikim, yereim, mischastim, they think they figured it all out from Svarim. So they think Torah says the taiva is a tumah, and it's all the Yetzer Hara really, so they don't talk to their wife. They don't want to even get the Yetzer Hara going. So they wake the wife up in the middle of the night, and they ask her shos, and she says yes, because this is what tzaddikim do. And it's all ki'ilu k'foy shade, and then he runs away from the tumah, and then he feels bad and guilty that, it felt like grada, that it wasn't so heilig, it felt a shtickle teikaf hataiva. Oy, what happened? I forgot all the notes I wrote down. Oh, but he hears from his friends, they also have the same problem. Shalom alecha nafshi. He meant well. That's his vivid description. We're only quoting passages from it. That's I would say it's worth a read. Not for that. So he says, the Ramban came to tell you that you shouldn't understand from the Rambam that the taiva is a dover meguna. You're trying to be memayit b'chol koichoi, and it's all l'shem shemayim. It says this tos is goyrem mechshoylem rabim, and in fact, based reasonable argument based on the Gemara, b'nei teisha midas. A person who goes to that extreme, l'chayr would be over on b'nei teisha midas, because it says oines shina. Rashi says, b'toich shunenas b'shina inim mis'avel kol kach, and it's just to do the other person a favor. That's b'nei teisha midas. He says, the people learning this Gemara and Rashi, they say, Taka, Rashi stimmt nicht with what we're trying to do. Okay, tzarechiyah. Okay, he has a point. Again he describes, I heard about the Yereim, the Mischastim. They make Shemenes Achanis to do it L'Shem Shemayim B'lei Tayev Klal. And Makban Chatzois, one of the things that I also spoke about was Chatzois. We didn't get into that. Person is Osuk Ad Chatzi Alayla. That's why the woman is sleeping, of course. Ad Chatzi Alayla, learning and davening, going through all the Svarim. And then after Chatzois Alayla, he comes and he wakes his wife up and he says a few words and she says, yeah, do whatever you want. And he feels good. Oh, I was Mekayim the Mitzvah without the Yetzer Hara. And then he wonders why his kids turn out to Shoyim or Tipshim. So he says it's all because they were trained to think that it's a davar meguna, and be'emes, even if you were matzliach, b'loi taiva, yoytze haben hanoiled, sachal v'tipish, dafka if it's b'li taiva. But based on that Gemara, because she's in her sleep and she's upset and she's uncomfortable. B'nei teisha midas. So that's what the Ramban came to clarify. He says that's what the Ramban is warning, that you shouldn't think it's a gnai v'kir to enjoy what's going on. He says, we see in the Torah, here he brings his vart from Shabbos, and we see in the Torah, the Eibishter fed the Yidden in the Midbalach min Hashemayim, Tzapichas b'dvash, and had all the tastes in the world. The Torah says, Eretz Yisrael, Savas chalav b'dvash, Yom HaShabbos, we're supposed to eat, Dogim, G'dayil Muktanim, and this is Vis Anag al Havaya. And it says in the Rambam, Kol HaMarbe on Shabbos Arei Meshubach, and Tashmish Amit is also Merenik Shabbos, and that's why in Islamid Chachamim is Leila Shabbos. So Bazai, the Rambam was influenced by, the Rambam quoted the Greek philosopher who said that it's Gnai Hulanu. So the Greek philosopher didn't understand Torah. Torah shows us how you can enjoy life, and it's halachic. That's his vart. Sheish be'em koyach lis'aneg al Hashem b'meichel b'mishkol mamish k'meyad marishin kaid machet. He's getting very carried away. Hashem wants, she is anguban of al tov Hashem. This is all unlike what the Rambam is quoting from him. And he says, Shema adam ha'isa dvarim elu l'shem mitzvah l'shem shemayim ha-mitzvah Olav lis'anig b'chol koichoi shenasam bo HaKadosh Baruch Hu kifi tivai u'briusai shekachu d'tzei Hashem Yisbarach. So that's his quote. You take that quote and put it on a sticker. Olav lis'anig b'chol koichoi. And this is what Yiddishkeit accomplishes, gewaldig. And if you're not doing this, then you messed up entirely. You missed the whole point, according to the teachings of Rabbi Shiur. And then he actually gets into a bunch of Zoyars, interestingly, and he shows a bunch of Zoyars, where even in Zoyar it seems to describe that there's a simcha, and that it's done b'simcha, b'achtos, b'rotzen. Also interesting, he has some points. And like I said, you want to see it by Riches, go check it out. Now, I've seen that not only, of course, the Chassidische Welt, of course, does not subscribe to this philosophy. And in fact, I saw someone who wrote a whole article, and he wanted to argue that he thinks Rabbi Shiur was writing this in response to the Chassidische Welt already in Eretz Yisrael in the 50s. He passed away in 1952. And that by mischastim he means Chassidim. I'm not convinced, because I would assume that the Litvische world could also have the same, people read the same Mekayros and can also be inspired. But even in the Litvische world, just last year, someone shared with me a few weeks ago that someone put out a kuntras, binyan abayas, al pi derech ha-Torah, and there's a whole attack on there on Rav Shiur. What are you talking about? It says, k'misha k'foy shade. What is this? Lis'anig b'chol koichai. It sounds ridiculous. Someone said that the person who shared it said it's right by Imrach, this Chassidish Amaisa, that the Chassidim in Tel Aviv had a Sheva Brachas, and Rav Shiur was there, and he was speaking, and he got a little carried away with psukim from Shir Hashirim or whatever, and B'chol Dvorkin skimmed at him and said, Shvaig dual to Noyef. So maybe there's a connection of how Amalek Chassidim would have responded to something like this. I don't know if we should put that on the record. Okay. We said something controversial. Finally. Last 5 minutes, we made it in. Right, there are enough Mekayros that suggest otherwise. And Lis'anig b'chol koichai does sound a little suspect. But I would say I could accept that there's something to what he's saying. And just like B'poyel Mamash, let's take Shabbos. Right? There's some people are sitting by the Shabbos table, and it's all the food, they're sitting, and licht in the essen, beret wegen essen, and then you can go to another home where the food is also not bad, and it fits in nicely. It helps the Indian move along. It comes together somehow. I don't know if we'll get carried away with describing it as me'ena am haba, but it doesn't seem to be a stira to how a person bisman hazeh could aspire to try to bring these things together. So if you take his idea in that direction and say, look, same thing here. You're trying to have the kedusha. You're not just focusing in the moment and forgetting about everything. You have the kedusha in mind. But there are other quotes there that he describes a little bit more what he means. That person tells his wife, "We're going to have halachic children together." He does write in that Sgan as well. It wasn't in the passages that I copied here, but he does write in that type of direction. Like there's a certain wholesomeness, a beauty to bringing the Gashmis and the Ruchnis together. It's a little hard to prescribe such a thing, and I'm sure every person is different, but I could accept that he has a point that can be presented reasonably. In my opinion, to share I have a relative who once wrote an article and he quoted another relative of mine, and he said that person said in an unpublished theory, he was sitting at the Shabbos table and he said a vart, so it's an unpublished theory. I have an unpublished theory that couples, married people, were not, up until even 100 years ago, Lav Dafka had a strong day-to-day ongoing relationship. They were partners in a homestead. They weren't necessarily hanging out with each other. Mashenkin today, over the last few decades, again, every decade it accelerates. The whole foundation of marriage at this point is that it's based, it's built, it's predicated on the fact that it's a very close personal relationship, at least for the English-speaking crowd, which would be Litvish and Chabad. So when it comes to, once the whole marriage is built that way, now all of a sudden you come to this aspect of marriage, and it's the odd thing out. It doesn't fit into that. You want to figure out that has to fit in somehow also. And if it doesn't fit in with that, then people will feel tremendous discomfort. Something's wrong. They'll go to complain to the experts. What's going on? So I would posit that that's the basis for this idea spreading at the rate that it is, because that's the only way that fits with marriage and the interaction between husband and wife as it exists in this day and age. So now the question would be, if there's no direct hisyachsus from the Rebbe as far as I know, the question would be, if we take the Rebbe's shita generally, that you have to take into, just like when it came to shidduchim, the Rebbe changed how shidduchim go about. The Chassidish Welt, they still stick to the old-fashioned way. Chabad, again, just like the other English-speaking Frima Yidden, is you have to shichas halev, etc., etc. That's all part of heading in that direction of more of a solid personal connection. So it could be Afshekam and Zagantaka, that the Rebbe would agree that there is some room to bring this idea in. But it's still, ultimately, I would say, it's pretty hard to argue to say that from now on, a person doesn't have to try to occupy one's mind with Heilige Zachen b'Shas Maisa. Don't see why that's mamish upgefragt, and when it's something that the minimum of being Mekayim, what it says in Tanya and Chassidus, to think Heilige Zachen, to be memayit hana asay a little bit, whatever that means, and at the same time, that's also a strong personal physical connection. I think it is possible to combine those things in some kind of way like that. But it's the beginning of a discussion. It's not maskana. Like I said, I'm not telling anyone to do. This is food for thought.